Word spread through Kepler Station faster than Jake had expected. By the next morning, everyone knew that a human was harboring one of the fractured. The reaction was swift and harsh. Alien traders who had done business with Jake for years now refused to speak with him. The Zephyrians dimmed their crystalline bodies whenever he passed, and the Methani turned away from him in their environmental suits. Jake tried to conduct normal business but found doors closing everywhere he went. The Saurian merchant he was supposed to meet about the titanium shipment sent word that the deal was cancelled. A group of Skywards that had been interested in his rare earth minerals flew away when they saw him approaching. "This is getting bad." "Jake," Lisa said as they walked back to the ship after another failed meeting, "nobody wants to deal with us anymore." "Then we'll find people who will," Jake replied, but he could feel the weight of the station's disapproval pressing down on him. Back on the Wanderer, Cypher was moving around the medical bay under his own power. The repairs Jake had made were holding, and the aliens' cybernetic systems seemed to be adapting and healing themselves. Jake was amazed at how quickly the fractured technology could repair damage once it was stabilized. "Your people fear me," Cypher said when Jake entered the medical bay. "I can sense their emotional broadcasts through the station's communication systems. They want me gone." "My people don't speak for all humans," Jake said firmly, "and fear doesn't make them right." Before Cypher could respond, the ship's communication system chimed with an incoming message. Jake activated the screen to see Elena Scott, the human engineer from Horizon Base. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and keen eyes that spoke of years spent solving impossible problems. "Captain Morrison, I've been analyzing the data you sent about your friend's cybernetic systems," Elena said without preamble. "This technology is incredible. I've never seen anything like the self-repair capabilities or the integration with organic tissue. Can you help him?" Jake asked. "I think so, but I need to see the systems in person. The problem is that Horizon Base is under Council jurisdiction. I can't officially help a fractured refugee." Jake was about to respond when Lisa called from the bridge. "Jake, you need to see this. We've got a big ship coming in." Jake rushed to the bridge and looked out at the approaching vessel. It was a Council enforcement ship, sleek and deadly, with the distinctive markings of the Galactic Patrol. The ship was 3 times the size of the Wanderer and bristling with weapons. "This is the Council vessel Judgment calling Kepler Station," came a cold, crystalline voice over the communication system. "We are here to collect a fractured criminal known to be harbored on this station." Jake recognized the voice as belonging to a Zephyrian, though this one's tone was harder and more mechanical than any he had heard before. Through the bridge windows he could see other ships moving away from the station, not wanting to be caught in whatever was about to happen. "Jake!" Cypher appeared on the bridge, his cybernetic parts humming with anxiety. "That ship belongs to Admiral Crystal's Song of Justice. She has been hunting the fractured for months. She has captured dozens of my people." "What does she do with them?" Jake asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. "Some are taken to research facilities where they study our technology. Others simply disappear. None are ever seen again." The communication system crackled again. "This is Admiral Crystal's Song of Justice to Captain Morrison of the human vessel Wanderer. You are ordered to surrender the fractured criminal immediately." Jake activated the communication system. "Admiral, this being has committed no crime that I can see. He's a refugee seeking help." "Fractured beings are criminals by their very nature," the Admiral's voice came back, cold and final. "Their existence violates the natural order established by the Council. You will surrender the creature or face the consequences." "And what consequences would those be?" Jake asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Obstruction of Council justice, harboring a dangerous fugitive, and violations of interspecies safety protocols. You could face imprisonment or worse." Jake looked at Cypher, who was standing quietly near the navigation console. The alien's large eyes were fixed on the Council ship, and Jake could see fear there, but also something else. Resignation. Cypher expected to be abandoned, just like he had been abandoned by every other species in the galaxy. "I'm sorry, Admiral, but I can't do that," Jake said into the communicator. "This person is under my protection." The silence that followed stretched for long seconds. Then Admiral Crystal Song of Justice's voice returned, even colder than before. Then you have chosen to make humanity an enemy of the Galactic Council. Prepare to face the consequences of your foolish decision. Before Jake could respond, his communication system lit up with dozens of incoming signals. Ship after ship was calling in, and to Jake's amazement, they were all human vessels, cargo haulers, mining ships, passenger transports, and even a few military escort vessels were declaring their intention to stand with the Wanderer. "This is Captain Danny Cooper of the merchant vessel Star Runner," came one voice. "We stand with Captain Morrison and his decision to help a refugee." "This is the cargo hauler Golden Dawn," said another. "No human ship should stand alone against council bullying." One by one, human ships throughout the sector were taking sides, and they were choosing to support Jake. Within an hour, more than 30 human vessels had positioned themselves between the Wanderer and the council enforcement ship. Lisa stared at the tactical display in amazement. "Jake, there's an entire fleet out there. Where did they all come from?" "Word travels fast in space," Jake replied, but he was as surprised as she was. He had hoped for some support from fellow humans, but this response was beyond anything he had imagined. The largest ship in the impromptu fleet was the colony transport New Horizon, commanded by Captain Carol Bennett. Jake had met her once before at a trade conference, and he remembered her as a tough, no-nonsense woman who had spent decades ferrying colonists to the outer worlds. "Captain Morrison, this is Carol Bennett," came her voice over the communicator. "I've got 500 colonists aboard, including families with children. They all voted unanimously to support your actions. Sometimes doing the right thing is more important than following orders." Admiral Crystal Song of Justice tried to break through the human communications, her voice sharp with frustration. "Human vessels, you are interfering with council justice. Stand down immediately or face the consequences." "Admiral," Carol Bennett responded calmly, "with respect, we don't recognize council authority over matters of basic humanitarian aid. This refugee deserves help, not persecution." The standoff continued for hours. More council ships arrived, but so did more human vessels. Jake watched in amazement as his simple act of helping an injured stranger had sparked something much larger. Humans from across the sector were coming together to protect someone they had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. "I don't understand," Cypher said quietly, his cybernetic voice filled with wonder. "Your species barely knows me, yet they risk their lives to protect me. Why?" Jake looked out at the fleet of human ships surrounding them and thought about the question. "Because that's what humans do. We see someone in trouble and we help. It doesn't matter if you're human or alien, organic or cybernetic. If you need help, then you deserve help." "But the Council has great power," Cypher said. "They can make life very difficult for your species." "Maybe," Jake admitted, "but some things are more important than politics or convenience. Your people didn't choose to become what they are. You were forced to change or die, and you chose to live. I respect that choice." As the hours passed, the tension continued to build. Admiral Crystal Song of Justice was clearly frustrated by the human response, but she was also outnumbered. More human ships kept arriving, creating a protective barrier around Kepler Station. Elena Scott managed to dock her engineering shuttle with the Wanderer during the standoff. She brought advanced repair equipment and began working with Cypher to stabilize his cybernetic systems further. Jake was impressed by how quickly the engineer adapted to working with fractured technology. "This is remarkable," Elena said as she studied Cypher's internal systems. "The integration between organic and artificial components is seamless. This isn't crude cybernetic enhancement. This is true symbiosis." "Can it be replicated?" Jake asked. "In theory, yes, but it would require incredible precision and understanding of both biological and technological systems. Your friend's people were brilliant engineers." As Elena worked, Jake realized that the situation had evolved beyond a simple rescue. This was becoming a test of principles, a challenge to the entire galactic order. The question was no longer just about helping one refugee. It was about whether compassion or fear would guide the future of interspecies relations. The answer to that question would shape the galaxy for generations to come. Jake worked quickly in the medical bay, his hand steady despite the strange situation. The alien's cybernetic parts were failing one by one, sending cascades of sparks across the metal examination table. Jake had basic medical training like most ship captains, but nothing had prepared him for treating someone who was half machine. The being's breathing was shallow and irregular. Through its translucent skin, Jake could see the circuit patterns pulsing with a faint blue light. Some sections had already gone dark, and Jake worried that meant critical systems were shutting down. He started an IV line with basic medical fluid, hoping that the organic parts of the alien would respond to standard treatment. "Lisa, bring me the engineering toolkit," Jake called to his cargo handler, who stood nervously in the doorway. "Jake, what if that thing is dangerous?" Lisa asked, but she moved to get the tools anyway. "It's not a thing," Jake replied firmly, "and right now it's dying." Using the small plasma welder from his repair kit, Jake began to carefully seal some of the damaged cybernetic connections. He had no idea if he was helping or making things worse, but doing nothing seemed like the greater risk. Each time he managed to repair a connection, more of the circuit patterns under the alien's skin began to glow. After an hour of careful work, the alien's breathing steadied. Its eyes opened and focused on Jake's face. When it tried to speak, the words came out as a mix of organic sounds and electronic tones. Jake's universal translator struggled for a moment before finding the pattern. "Why?" The voice was strange, like hearing someone speak through a broken radio, but the word was clear enough. "Why what?" Jake asked, continuing to work on a damaged circuit near the alien's shoulder. "Why help me? Your species, yeah, others. They fear us." Jake paused in his work and looked into the alien's large, dark eyes. "You needed help. That's reason enough for me." The alien stared at Jake for a long moment, as if trying to understand something completely foreign. "I am called Cypher. My people are the fractured. We are hunted across all of space." "Hunted by who?" Jake asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. "Everyone," Cypher replied simply. "The Galactic Council has declared us abominations. We are to be captured or destroyed on sight." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The Galactic Council was the governing body for most of civilized space. If they had ordered the destruction of Cypher's people, then Jake was harboring someone that half the galaxy considered a criminal. "What did your people do?" Jake asked. Cypher's cybernetic parts hummed softly before he answered. "We survived." Over the next few hours, as Jake continued to stabilize Cypher's systems, the story came out in pieces. The fractured had not chosen to merge with technology. They had been a peaceful species living on a world orbiting a dying star. When their sun began to go nova, they had minutes to evacuate their entire civilization. "We had no choice," Cypher explained, his voice growing stronger as Jake repaired more of his systems. "The radiation would have killed us instantly. Our bodies could not survive in space for the journey to safety. The only way to live was to merge with our technology." Jake listened as Cypher described the desperate final moments of their homeworld. Scientists and engineers working frantically to create a way for their people to survive. The painful process of integrating cybernetic systems with living tissue. The horror of watching their sun explode as the last of their people fled into space. "How many of you survived?" Jake asked. "Perhaps 1,000. We scattered across the galaxy, hoping to find worlds where we could live in peace. Instead, we found only fear and hatred." Jake understood now why the other aliens had reacted with such disgust. The fractured represented something that challenged the natural order as other species understood it. They were living proof that the line between organic and artificial could be crossed, and that terrified civilizations that had built their entire worldview around keeping those boundaries clear. "Where were you trying to go?" Jake asked. "Nowhere," Cypher replied sadly. "We have given up looking for a home. I was simply trying to escape the patrol ships that have been hunting me for months." Jake's hands stilled on the tools he was using. Patrol ships, Galactic Council enforcement vessels. They have been systematically hunting down the fractured. Some of us have been captured and taken to research facilities. Others have simply been destroyed. The medical bay door chimed, and Lisa poked her head in. "Jake, we've got company." "Commander, Vex is demanding to speak with you." Jake sighed and looked at Cypher, whose cybernetic systems were finally stable enough for him to sit up on the examination table. "Rest here. I'll handle this." Jake found Commander Vex waiting in the Wanderer's main corridor, flanked by two Saurian security guards. The reptilian's cold eyes fixed on Jake with obvious displeasure. "Captain Morrison, you are harboring a dangerous criminal," Vex stated without preamble. "Galactic Council law requires you to surrender it immediately." "That being has a name," Jake replied calmly. "And I haven't seen any evidence that he's committed any crimes." "Its very existence is a crime against nature," Vex hissed. "The mixing of organic and artificial life is forbidden." "Says who?" Jake challenged. "I've seen plenty of species that use cybernetic enhancements. The Zephyrians use artificial components to maintain their crystal matrices. The Methani rely on technological systems to process their atmosphere. Even Saurians use medical implants when needed." "That is different," Vex snapped. "Those are tools that enhance natural life. These creatures have violated the fundamental boundary between living and artificial. They are no longer truly alive." Jake felt his anger building. "That's the biggest load of garbage I've ever heard. Cypher is more alive than half the bureaucrats in the council chambers." "You will surrender the abomination or face the consequences," Vex threatened. "And what consequences would those be?" Jake asked, crossing his arms. Before Vex could answer, Lisa appeared at Jake's shoulder. "Jake, you need to see this. We're getting messages from other human ships in the sector." Jake followed Lisa to the ship's communication station. The screen showed dozens of incoming messages from human vessels throughout the region. Word was spreading quickly about Jake's actions, and the response was not what he had expected. "Captain Morrison, this is the cargo hauler New Dawn," one message read. "We heard what you did on Kepler Station. If you need supplies or support, just ask." Another message from the mining vessel Deep Strike said, "We've got medical supplies if your passenger needs them. What you did was right." Message after message showed the same theme. Humans throughout the sector were offering help, supplies, and support. Jake realized that while the alien species saw only an abomination, his fellow humans saw what he had seen, someone in need of help. "This is interesting," Lisa said, pointing to one particular message. "Elena Scott on the engineering platform Horizon Base wants to talk to you. Says she might be able to help with cybernetic repairs." Jake looked back toward the medical bay where Cypher was resting. The alien had been surprised by Jake's willingness to help, but Jake was beginning to realize that his reaction might not have been as unusual as Cypher believed. At least not among humans. "Get me a secure channel to Elena Scott," Jake ordered, "and start quietly reaching out to other human ships. I want to know how many people are willing to stand up to the council." Vex was still waiting in the corridor when Jake returned, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Well, Captain Morrison, what is your decision?" Jake looked the Saurian commander in the eye without flinching. "Cypher stays with me. He's under my protection." "Then you have chosen to make yourself an enemy of the Galactic Council," Vex replied coldly. "If helping someone in need makes me an enemy of the Council, then maybe the Council needs to take a long look at its priorities," Jake shot back. As Vex and his guards left the ship, Jake realized that he had just crossed a line that there would be no coming back from. He was now officially harboring a fugitive from galactic law, but as he returned to check on Cypher, who was examining his repaired cybernetic systems with something approaching hope, Jake knew he had made the right choice. The Fractured had been abandoned by every species in the galaxy except one. If humans were the only ones willing to show compassion to these refugees, then Jake was proud to be human. He just hoped that pride would be enough to get them all through what was coming next. Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked the cargo manifest on his datapad. Kepler Station buzzed with activity around him, aliens of every shape and size moving through the crowded corridors. The smell of different atmospheres, mixed together in the recycled air, creating a unique scent that every spacer knew well. Jake had been trading in this sector for 15 years, and Kepler Station felt like a second home to him. His ship, the Wanderer, sat docked at Bay 7 with a full cargo hold of rare earth minerals from the outer colonies. The Saurians were paying good money for titanium these days, and Jake never passed up a profitable deal. He walked through the station's main trading floor, nodding to familiar faces. A group of crystalline Zephyrians hummed in harmonious tones as they examined some electronic components. Their bodies caught the station's lights and threw rainbow patterns across the metal walls. The Methani floated in their environmental suits near the atmospheric control station. Jake could see the green gas swirling inside their helmets as they breathed their native atmosphere. Even after all these years, he still found it amazing how many different forms life could take. The tall, bird-like skywards stood near the communication arrays, their feathers ruffled as they discussed something in their high-pitched language. Jake was heading to the cantina to meet with a Saurian trader when the alarm started blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the station, and the computerized voice began its emergency announcement. All personnel report to emergency stations. Unauthorized vessel approaching station. All personnel report to emergency stations. The trading floor erupted in chaos. Aliens scattered in different directions, some seeking shelter, others trying to get to their ships. Jake pushed through the crowd toward the observation deck. If there was trouble coming, he wanted to see it for himself. Years of experience had taught him that information was more valuable than panic. The observation deck was already packed with curious onlookers when Jake arrived. Through the thick, transparent aluminum windows, he could see a ship unlike anything he had ever encountered. The vessel was roughly the size of a small freighter, but its hull seemed to move and shift like liquid metal. Colors flowed across its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ship was clearly damaged, trailing sparks and debris as it limped toward the station. "What in the hell is that thing?" muttered Lisa Rodriguez, Jake's cargo handler, as she joined him at the window. "Never seen anything like it," Jake replied, his eyes fixed on the strange vessel. "Looks like whoever's flying it is in serious trouble." The alien ship barely made it to the outer docking bay before its engines gave out completely. It crashed into the docking platform with a grinding screech of metal on metal. Emergency crews rushed toward the bay, but they stopped well short of the vessel. Even from the observation deck, Jake could see the hesitation in their movements. Commander Vex, the station's Saurian security chief, arrived with a squad of armed guards. His reptilian features were twisted in disgust as he stared at the crashed ship. The Saurians had always been the most rigid about following protocols, and this unknown vessel clearly violated every safety regulation in the book. "Seal off the area," Vex hissed into his communicator. "No one gets close until we know what we're dealing with." Jake watched as more species gathered around the docking bay, but all kept their distance. The Zephyrians' crystalline bodies had gone dark with fear. The Methani huddled together in their environmental suits, and the skywards had backed away to the far side of the bay. Everyone seemed afraid of the strange ship, though Jake couldn't understand why. For several minutes, nothing happened. The ship sat silent and still, its hull continuing to shift colors in hypnotic patterns. Then, slowly, a section of the hull began to open. It didn't slide or hinge like a normal airlock. Instead, it seemed to dissolve, the metal flowing away like water to create an opening. The figure that emerged made every alien in the bay take another step backward. It was clearly humanoid in basic shape, with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, but that was where the similarities to any known species ended. The being was tall and thin, much taller than a human, with elongated limbs that moved with an odd, mechanical precision. Its skin was translucent, and Jake could see what looked like circuits or wiring running beneath the surface. Parts of its body seemed to be made of the same flowing metal as its ship. The creature took 2 steps forward and collapsed. Its body convulsed as sparks shot from various points along its limbs. A high-pitched whining sound filled the air like machinery breaking down. Jake realized with a shock that this being was part machine, part organic. The cybernetic components were failing, and the creature was dying. The assembled aliens recoiled in horror. "Abomination," hissed Commander Vex. "This thing violates the natural order." The Zephyrians' harmonic humming turned into a discordant wail of disgust. Their crystalline forms flickered with patterns that Jake had learned meant revulsion. The Methani's green gas swirled more rapidly in their suits as they backed away further. Even the usually calm skywards ruffled their feathers and made sharp, alarmed calls. "Someone call medical." Jake said, starting toward the docking bay entrance. No, Vex snapped, blocking his path with a clawed hand. That thing is contaminated. We don't know what diseases it might carry, what technology might infect our systems. Jake looked around at the gathered aliens. Fear and disgust were written on every face, in every posture. The station's medical staff had arrived but refused to enter the docking bay. They stood behind the security cordon, making excuses about contamination protocols and unknown biological hazards. The dying creature on the docking bay floor convulsed again, its cybernetic parts sparking more violently. Jake could see that it was conscious, its large eyes moving to look at the crowd of aliens staring at it. There was intelligence in those eyes, and pain, and something that looked like hope fading to despair as no one moved to help. It's dying, Jake said simply. Good, muttered one of the Zephyrians. Such violations of nature should not exist. Jake stared at the alien crowd in disbelief. These were civilized species, members of the Galactic Council, beings who claimed to value life and cooperation. Yet here they stood, watching another sentient being die simply because it looked different, because it had somehow merged its biology with technology. You're all just going to stand there? Jake asked. It's not natural, Vex replied. The mixing of flesh and machine is forbidden by the natural order. This creature is an abomination that should never have been allowed to exist. Jake looked at the dying being again. It had managed to lift its head slightly and was looking directly at him. In that moment, Jake saw something that the other aliens had missed. Behind the strange appearance and the failing cybernetics, this was someone, not something. This was a person who was scared, hurt, and alone. Without another word, Jake pushed past Commander Vex and walked into the docking bay. Behind him, he could hear Lisa calling his name, her voice filled with concern. The aliens around the bay made sounds of alarm and disgust, but Jake ignored them all. He knelt beside the collapsed figure and gently placed a hand on what he hoped was its shoulder. Hey there, he said softly. I'm Jake. I'm going to help you. The creature's eyes focused on Jake's face with what looked like surprise. When it tried to speak, only electronic static came out, but Jake could see gratitude in its expression. Can you move? Jake asked. The creature managed a weak nod. Jake carefully helped the being to its feet, supporting most of its weight. The crowd of aliens backed away further as Jake began walking toward the docking bay exit. Commander Vex moved to block their path again. Human, I cannot allow you to remove that creature from quarantine, Vex declared. Jake looked the Saurian commander in the eye. This person is dying. I'm taking them to my ship's medical bay. You can file whatever complaints you want later. It is not a person, Vex hissed. It is a technological abomination. Looks like a person to me, Jake replied, continuing to walk forward with the injured alien leaning heavily against him. The crowd parted reluctantly as Jake made his way through the station corridors. Aliens pointed and stared, making sounds of disgust and fear. Some covered their children's eyes or hurried away as if the strange being might somehow contaminate them just by being near. Jake had seen prejudice before, but never anything like this. The level of fear and hatred directed at this injured stranger was unlike anything in his experience. As they walked, he wondered what this being's story was, where it had come from, and why its very existence seemed to terrify every other species in the galaxy. By the time they reached the Wanderer, the injured alien was barely conscious. Jake helped it into the ship's small medical bay and began running basic scans. Whatever this being was, it was fighting for its life, and Jake Morrison was the only person in the entire sector willing to help it survive. 3 weeks had passed since Admiral Crystalsong of Justice ordered the ceasefire, and Kepler Station had transformed into something no one could have imagined. What had started as a simple trading post was now the center of the most important scientific collaboration in galactic history. The research facility that Elena Scott and her team had built in the station's expanded docking bays hummed with activity day and night. Scientists from a dozen species worked alongside fractured refugees who had begun arriving after word spread that they might finally find sanctuary. Jake walked through the facility each morning, still amazed at how quickly everything had changed. The integration process is now stable for all tested species, Elena reported during the daily briefing. We've successfully helped a paralyzed saurian regain full mobility, given a Methani the ability to survive in standard atmosphere without his environmental suit, and helped 3 Zephyrians maintain their crystal matrices even after severe damage. Cypher stood at Elena's side, no longer the broken refugee Jake had found weeks ago, but a confident scientist contributing to work that could reshape the galaxy. His cybernetic systems had continued to evolve and improve, adapting to new challenges, and incorporating improvements suggested by researchers from other species. The applications extend far beyond medical treatment, Cypher added. We have developed systems that allow skywards to survive underwater, humans to process methane atmospheres, and saurians to regulate their temperature in extreme environments. Jake listened to the reports with a mixture of pride and amazement. The scared, dying alien he had helped was now leading research that could solve problems affecting millions of beings across known space. But he also knew that the real test was still coming. Any word from the Council? Jake asked. Elena's expression grew more serious. Admiral Crystal Song of Justice has been in constant communication with the Council chambers. The debates have been going on for weeks. Some Council members are excited about the potential benefits, but others are still afraid of what they call technological contamination. What does that mean exactly? Asked Danny Cooper, who had arrived that morning with a shipment of research supplies. They're worried that if species start using fractured technology, they'll become dependent on it, Scale of Truth explained. The young Saurian had become one of the project's most enthusiastic researchers. They fear that natural evolution will stop and artificial enhancement will take over. Jake found this argument frustrating. Every species in the galaxy already used technology to improve their lives, from simple tools to complex medical devices. The fractured technology was just a more advanced version of what everyone was already doing. That's like saying we shouldn't use medicine because it interferes with natural selection, Jake muttered. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the station's traffic control. All vessels, we have multiple ships approaching. Configuration suggests a major council fleet. Jake rushed to the observation deck with Cypher and Elena beside him. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see dozens of ships approaching. Kepler Station. But these weren't the aggressive patrol vessels they had faced before. The fleet included research ships, medical vessels, and even some of the Council's most advanced exploration craft. At the center of the formation was a massive ship that Jake recognized as the Council's primary diplomatic vessel. The kind of ship that only arrived when the most important decisions in galactic history were being made. This is Council Speaker Prime Harmony of Voices calling Kepler Station, came a voice over the communication system. Jake had never heard a Zephyrian speak with such formal authority. We request permission to dock and begin formal negotiations regarding the status of the fractured and their technology. Jake looked at Cypher, whose cybernetic systems were humming, with nervous energy. This is it. They're either going to accept what we've proven or try to shut us down permanently. Whatever happens, we've already succeeded in one way, Cypher replied. My people are no longer alone. We have friends and allies who see us as more than monsters. The negotiations took place in Kepler Station's largest conference room, which had been hastily expanded to accommodate representatives from multiple species. Council Speaker Prime Harmony of Voices led a delegation of senior officials, while Jake found himself speaking for the human position alongside Carol Bennett and several other ship captains. The evidence presented by your research team is compelling, the Council Speaker began, her crystalline form pulsing with careful diplomatic patterns. The medical applications alone could save millions of lives across the galaxy. But, Jake knew there would be a but. But the Council remains concerned about the long-term implications of widespread technological integration. We must proceed carefully to avoid unintended consequences. Admiral Crystal Song of Justice, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, finally spoke up. I have spent weeks studying the research data and observing the fractured refugees. I must admit that my previous assessment was wrong. These beings are not the monsters I believed them to be. Her words carried weight with the Council delegation. Jake could see the surprise on several faces as one of the most hardline council enforcers changed her position. The fractured represent adaptation and survival, the Admiral continued, qualities that all species should admire rather than fear. I recommend that the Council formally recognize them as refugees deserving of protection and assistance. The debates continued for hours, but Jake could sense the tide turning. The evidence was too strong, the potential benefits too great, and the moral argument too clear to ignore. When the vote was finally called, it was unanimous. The Galactic Council hereby recognizes the fractured as a legitimate species, deserving of full protection under interstellar law, Council Speaker Prime Harmony of Voices announced. Furthermore, we authorize the establishment of a joint research initiative to study and develop fractured integration technology for the benefit of all species. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Kepler Station had ever seen. Beings from a dozen species worked together to establish what would become known as New Haven, a permanent research facility dedicated to developing safe integration technology. Jake stood on the observation deck months later, watching ships from across the galaxy arrive at the expanded station. Humans, Saurians, Zephyrians, Methani, Skywards, and Fractured all worked together in the research facilities below. The fear and prejudice that had once dominated interspecies relations was slowly being replaced by cooperation and understanding. "You did something remarkable," Cypher said, joining Jake at the window. The alien's appearance had changed over the months as his cybernetic systems continued to evolve, but his gratitude remained constant. "I just helped someone who needed help," Jake replied. "The rest of this happened because good people chose to do the right thing." "No," Cypher said, firmly. "The rest of this happened because you showed everyone else that it was possible to choose compassion over fear. Your species has a gift for seeing the potential in others rather than just the threat." Jake watched a group of young researchers from multiple species working together on a new integration project. Among them were humans, aliens, and fractured, all collaborating as equals. The sight filled him with hope for the future. Maybe that's what the galaxy needed, Jake mused. Someone willing to take the first step. As he watched the bustling activity of New Haven, Jake realized that his simple decision to help a dying stranger had started something much larger than he had ever imagined. The fractured were no longer outcasts hunted across the galaxy, but partners in building a better future for everyone. And it had all started with one human who refused to walk away from someone in need. In a galaxy that had forgotten how to show compassion to the different and the desperate, humanity had remembered what it meant to reach out and help. That memory had changed everything. The broken alien Jake had found on the station's docking bay was now a respected scientist whose work was saving lives across the galaxy. The fear and hatred that had once defined interspecies relations was being replaced by understanding and cooperation. And Jake Morrison, a simple cargo hauler who had chosen compassion over convenience, had become the first human ambassador to a species that represented the future of galactic civilization. Sometimes, Jake reflected, the most important moments in history started with the simplest choices. The choice to help rather than to harm, to reach out rather than to walk away, to see a person in need rather than a monster to be feared. It was a very human choice, and Jake was proud to have made it. The standoff entered its third day with no sign of either side backing down. More ships continued to arrive, but now they weren't all human vessels. Jake watched from the Wanderer's bridge as a small transport bearing Saurian markings approached the human fleet. He expected it to join the Council forces, but instead it took position alongside the human ships. "This is unexpected," Lisa said, checking the ship's identification. "That's Scale of Truth, one of their younger scientists. What's he doing here?" The answer came through the communication system moments later. "Captain Morrison, this is Scale of Truth, of the research vessel New Understanding. I request permission to study the fractured refugees' technology. My government may not approve, but science knows no political boundaries." Jake looked at Cypher, who had been spending most of his time working with Elena Scott in the engineering bay. The alien cybernetic systems were running smoother than ever, and his organic parts seemed healthier too. What do you think, Cypher? Are you willing to let another alien examine your systems? If he comes in peace and with genuine curiosity rather than fear, then yes, Cypher replied. Perhaps it is time for other species to learn that we are not the monsters they believe us to be. Within hours of Scale of Truth's arrival, more non-human ships began to break away from their species' official positions. A young Methani in an atmospheric research pod joined the growing fleet. 2 Skyward Scouts arrived, claiming they were acting on behalf of their nest siblings rather than their government. Even a small group of Zephyrians in a crystal-growing facility announced their intention to learn more about fractured technology. Admiral Crystal's song of justice's frustration was evident in every transmission. All vessels supporting the criminal are in violation of Council law. Return to your home sectors immediately or face prosecution. But her threats were losing power as more ships arrived. The young members of various species who came to the station brought with them a different perspective than their elders. They saw opportunity where their government saw only threat. Jake, you need to see this, Elena called from the engineering bay. She had been working with Cypher and Scale of Truth for hours, and her excitement was obvious. We've made a breakthrough. Jake found the 3 of them gathered around a complex piece of equipment that Elena had assembled from spare parts and fractured technology. Cypher's hand was connected to the device by what looked like organic cables that had grown from his cybernetic systems. The integration process that created the fractured wasn't just about survival, Elena explained rapidly. It was about evolution. Their cybernetic systems don't just replace biological functions. They enhance them beyond anything we thought possible. Scale of Truth's reptilian features showed unusual excitement. The medical applications alone could revolutionize treatment for dozens of species. Paralysis, organ failure, neurological damage, all could potentially be healed using this technology. But there's more, Cypher added, his electronic voice carrying a note of hope that Jake had never heard before. The same process that saved my people could help others adapt to environments that would normally kill them. Humans could survive in the vacuum of space. Saurians could live in methane atmospheres. Zephyrians could exist without their crystal matrices. Jake stared at the device, beginning to understand the implications. You're talking about giving every species in the galaxy the ability to live anywhere, to survive anything. Exactly, Elena said. But only if we can perfect the integration process. Right now it's still unstable for anyone who wasn't born fractured. We need to study it more, refine it, make it safe. The news of the breakthrough spread quickly through the fleet surrounding Kepler Station. Jake found himself fielding calls from captains and scientists throughout the human ships, all eager to learn more. Even some of the younger aliens were requesting permission to join the research effort. But the breakthrough also escalated the tension with the Council forces. Admiral Crystal's song of justice clearly understood that something significant was happening, and her response was swift and harsh. All ships in the Kepler system, this is your final warning. Surrender the fractured criminal and disperse immediately, or we will take action to enforce Council law. Jake was on the bridge when the first shots were fired, but they didn't come from the Council ships. Instead, a small patrol vessel that had been trying to approach the station opened fire on one of the human cargo haulers. The shots were aimed at the engines, clearly intended to disable rather than destroy, but the message was clear. All ships, maintain defensive positions. Carol Bennett's voice came over the communication system. Do not return fire unless directly threatened. We're not here to start a war. But the Council forces seemed determined to provoke one. More patrol ships began targeting human vessels with disabling shots, trying to force the fleet to break up. Jake watched as ship after ship reported damage to engines or communication systems. They're trying to pick us off one by one, Lisa observed grimly. Then we need to give them a reason to stop, Jake replied. He activated the ship-wide communication system, broadcasting on all frequencies. This is Captain Jake Morrison to all ships in the Kepler system. We have made a discovery here that could benefit every species in the galaxy. The fractured technology we've been studying offers solutions to medical problems, environmental challenges, and survival needs that affect us all. He took a deep breath before continuing. I'm uploading the preliminary research data to all vessels now. See for yourselves what we've learned. This isn't about harboring criminals or violating natural law. This is about helping people, all people, live better lives. The data transmission took several minutes, during which the council ships held their fire. Jake could imagine Admiral Crystalsong of Justice and her staff frantically analyzing the information, trying to understand what they were dealing with. When the transmission finished, the silence stretched for nearly an hour. Then, unexpectedly, Admiral Crystalsong of Justice requested a direct communication channel with Jake. Her crystalline form appeared on the Wanderer's main screen, and Jake could see the internal struggle reflected in the patterns of light moving through her body. Captain Morrison, this data you have shared, is it accurate? It is, Jake replied simply. We've verified it multiple times. The fractured technology could help millions of people across dozens of species. If this is true, then the implications are... The Admiral paused, her crystalline structure flickering with uncertainty. This changes everything we thought we knew about the fractured. It should change how you treat them too, Jake said firmly. These aren't criminals or abominations. They're survivors who developed incredible technology out of necessity. They could be the key to solving problems that have plagued the galaxy for centuries. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, her internal lights pulsing in patterns Jake had never seen before. The Council will need time to analyze this information and reconsider our position on the fractured. How much time? Jake asked. I cannot say, but I will order my forces to cease hostilities while the Council deliberates. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was progress. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew and at Cypher, who had joined them to watch the exchange. The alien cybernetic systems were humming with what Jake had learned to recognize as hope. What happens now? Cypher asked. Now we wait, Jake replied. And we keep working on perfecting your technology. If we can prove beyond any doubt that the fractured can help instead of harm, maybe we can change minds throughout the galaxy. Elena appeared on the bridge, her face flushed with excitement. Jake, we've had a breakthrough in the stabilization process. I think we can make the integration, safe for other species. But we're going to need more resources, more researchers, and more time. Jake looked out at the fleet of ships surrounding them, at the young scientists from multiple species who had risked their careers to study fractured technology, and at Cypher, whose very existence had started this chain of events. I think we can arrange that, he said with a smile. The standoff at Kepler Station was far from over, but the nature of the conflict had changed. It was no longer about fear versus compassion, but about the past versus the future. And Jake was determined to make sure the future won.